So this is my approach when I'm trying to do something that's more vintage inspired, like more so like the late 60s, where it's kind of where I feel like technology and audio was getting a little bit better and engineers were figuring out solutions to a lot of the problems that they had in the early 60s, like, like miking individual pieces of the drums and which I know happened earlier on, but in the late 60s is when you start seeing more experimentation in the studio and sounds start to get a little bit drier and a little bit more in your face. So that's kind of what I want to show you here with just a little quick track that I just put together. It's like 40 seconds, just playing a couple chords. Sounds very much like late 60s Joe Cocker type stuff. So I'm just going to play this and break down sort of my process to how I go about making these sounds sound this way. So here we go from the top. All right, so there it is. It's very much a late 60s kind of rock groove. So I'm gonna go up here to the drums because this is where I feel like it's the hardest thing to get, especially if obviously if you're not recording live drums and you're using any type of plugin to do drums, then it can be a little tricky to get that sound. So I'm going to solo them here really quick so you can hear them on their own. So the first thing I did was obviously, in my case, pull up Easy Drummer. I laid out the groove that I wanted. I kind of just build it out. And I'm going to show you what, I'm going to bypass everything so you can see what these sound like on their own. So the only thing I'm going to leave is trigger on the snare. Let me see. Actually, I can bypass that also. So this is the original drums. Which sounds pretty terrible. So I do my usual process first and foremost, where I replace the kick and snare in a case like this with specific samples that I kind of blend together to try to get that sound. For in this case, let's see what I did with the snare. So there's a bunch of different samples down here that I kind of just put together in a blend. And on their own, it doesn't sound too great. Like if you hear the snare on its own, it sounds pretty bad. But I think the whole concept of this 60s, especially kind of like mid to late 60s sound, is very much the sum of everything together. So you're not supposed to take everything and solo it and there's the sound. You're going to really get it more so when you put everything together. So I'm going to just bring in some of these things. I'm going to leave the drum bus bypassed, but I'm going to put some of the processing on the snare and kick on its own. So this is the kit again without any processing on the mix bus, or drum bus, I mean. Oh, sorry. I forgot to activate trigger. So here's trigger on the kick. Huge difference. Yeah, so that's the basic sound that I got. I'm gonna bypass some of the reverb. Which sounds okay, but I feel like the part of this sound is a blend of different reverbs in this case. I have a couple things going on. So the main thing that I have here is a little bit of parallel compression on the drums, which is happening down here. Muted. On. It just adds a little bit more excitement to the drums, just so they stick out a little bit more. Then the first thing I added on the drum bus was the J37 tape from Abbey Road, which it just kind of gives it a little bit of a more analog-y sound. I feel like tape, in general, I like the way it just rounds it off a little bit. It sort of tightens up the low end, but it also just shaves off a little bit of the excessive highs, which in this case, we don't want a lot of too much high-end stuff, just because in this era, records were a little bit darker sounding, so that's kind of what I'm going for here. With the Pultec, I'm boosting a little bit of 60 and a little bit of 8K. Here's bypass. Here's on. And the next thing is a Fairchild. Which I feel like that's doing quite a bit of work. Then the last thing here is a little bit more saturation with this Sound Toys little radiator. So the congas, the congas and the tambourine is from Easy Drummer, as well as the shaker. The congas I just played on the keyboard separately. I like to kind of sum the drums and percussion together in specific cases like this one, where I want everything to just meld together more. So this is the drums. That's kind of how I came up with this. I think the dirtier the better. As far and the snare, I'm just boosting a little bit of top, a little bit of bottom, and cleaning up a lot of the low end stuff just to make room for the kick. And the biggest, honestly, one of the biggest things in this with the drums in this particular case is the room sounds. Which it sounds okay on its own, so this is the original sound. but I tend to put the Ocean Way plugin a lot to create like fake room sounds. If I take it off, it's not a huge difference. It's very subtle, but you can tell that the room kind of shrinks a little bit, or the drums in general just shrink. So I like to use that. So, and then the same thing. There's a mono drum room. I just have it crushed with a 1176. You can notice how these are obviously the original drums, not the ones with the sample, because I'm only putting a sample on the kick and the snare, so it's a little bit odd because you still get the blend of the modern drums in the background, but it doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things when you hear it as a whole. And then the last thing down here is just what I call a crunch, which is just even dirtier. And that's the drums. Bass is pretty straightforward. I used a Gibson 67 EBO, so it's a very, very dark sounding bass. There's no highs at all. It's almost like a sub bass, but for this, it's a late 60s bass, so it fits perfectly with this sound. And all I did was just put the Ampeg amp sim on it, just to give it a little bit more low end, compressing it a little bit with the Fairchild, taking out a little bit of lows, just to get rid of the super boomy stuff, a little bit of mud, and boosting a little bit of highs, even though it doesn't really do much in this case. I want the bass more to be something you feel versus something you hear in this case. So here it is again with the drums. And then next down here is the guitar, which there's two guitars. There's a solo, there's a kind of a rhythm guitar. The rhythm guitar is just straightforward. It's a Strat, and all I'm doing is just a little bit of 3K, and if you notice, I'm using a lot of like API, more kind of vintagey inspired EQs versus everything being with a Pro Q3, which won't really have a ton of character. And again, the whole point of this is to mess up the signals a little bit more, so that way that's how you kind of get that 60s sound, is by messing up the original clean signal, so that way it sounds a little dirtier. And the combination of everything together is how you get that sound. So tons of reverb on this, and I'll show you the reverbs in a minute. But no EQ on the actual track, just a little bit on the guitar bus. The other guitar is the kind of the solo, which sounds like this on its own. And that's basically just the guitar going through my top hat Vox style amp, kind of dimed. There is a little bit of an overdrive pedal going on also. This is what it sounds like without anything, the way I just recorded it. what I wanted to do with this was two things. One, give it a little bit more personality, and also shave away a little bit of the harshness. So I'm taking away some of the super high stuff, again, rolling off a lot of lows. I put on, this is kind of the most drastic thing that I did, is which I feel like this rat pedals, I use them a lot in mixing because I feel like they're very good to get something to cut through right in the middle. So you can, it pretty much puts almost like a notch on anything that you put this on, and it'll stick it right in the middle of a mix. And you can, with this cut control, you can pretty much like take away a lot of the harshness. And I don't even use a lot of the distortion. It's just more so for almost like an EQ. Again, Ocean Way, a little bit of compression. And then in this case, another J37 tape machine just to smooth out the high end a little bit. And I rolled off some more lows because there was a little bit more rumble after I put everything else on. And that's pretty much it. The piano, so the piano was, again, MIDI. I played it on MIDI. There's two pianos because the first one I did, it was supposed to be kind of like an upright. But then that ended up sounding a little too dark on its own, so I blended it with another virtual instrument piano that I played, which was more of a grand piano. And there's nothing special really going on there. This was more so for the texture in general, just to get that kind of like piano sound of the 60s. Just boosting some high, cutting some low end down here with the API, and that's pretty much it. Just a lot of reverb. And then the last thing is this B3, which on its own sounds like this. Sounds kind of bad. It sounds distorted, which is on purpose. But in the context of the mix, I'll show you. I'm gonna put the mix and then solo it. So in the mix itself, you don't really notice the distortion too much, but I wanted to get that really dirty Leslie kind of sound. So on its own, it was very sterile, even way louder. So the first thing I did was I added the Sans amp to dirty it up. API EQ, cleaning it up again. And in this case, I'm actually using the imager, which normally is to widen things. I'm using it the opposite, so I'm actually trying to make this more of a mono sound, just so that way, like, it doesn't take so much room in the spectrum. Which in this case, again, for like a 60s type mix, you want things to have their own space, and a lot of times you need to listen to things almost in mono, just to make sure everything works together really well. And that's it. And then some reverb. So some of the reverbs that I'm using on this are the EMT 140. I have it on about 2 seconds of reverb time, rolling off a lot of the lows, and a little bit of pre-delay. And I think that was it, outside of, and the capital chambers on some of the stuff. I think especially in the drums, I have that. The spring reverb is also sprinkled in some stuff just to give it more character, but that's it. I hope you enjoyed that look.